Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Florida, from Gainesville, Florida, in a hotel room. Hopefully, you can hear me okay. Yes, I've spoken to over a 500,000 teens so far since our son died by suicide just over 5 years ago. Our nonprofit, Johnny's Ambassadors, has over 2,000 now, nearly 2,100 parents with children in cannabis-induced psychosis. Um, so I know what you're going through. I understand. And I can say that in a way truly not many people can. I'd love to just tell you a little bit about my son before we start. As Paul mentioned, this is Johnny. Just some photos here to start out so that you can see his personality. Happy, charming, funny, involved in school, loved sports, loved music, very smart, involved in a lot of activities, all the things that everybody tells you with your child to get involved with. And sadly, on November 21st, just a few hours after he passed, the woman in black was in our living room saying, "Mr. and Mrs. Stackham with the coroner's office, and I'm so sorry to tell you that your son is deceased." So that is the beginning and the end of that story. But what's important is what comes in between. And that's what I want to just talk with you a little bit about today and what Paul invited me to share. What happened? How do you go from an amazing young person with their life ahead of them and then they're gone? And for me, the very simple answer is that I'm from Colorado. And you may not know, Colorado was the first state to legalize recreational marijuana. Johnny was 14 years old. This is what he looked like. I came out into the dispensaries and he went to his first high school party where there was marijuana at the party. I know because he told me. He said there was a young man who will be nameless who said, let's all get high. All the boys wanted to try it. Johnny tried to decline, but he felt very pressured. And he took it. And I was very surprised by that because this was not like Johnny at all. And I told him at the time, when he was 14 years old, I said, don't ever do that again, son, because that will destroy that brilliant mind of yours. But I had no idea at the time that marijuana was any different than when I was a kid. I knew nothing. I used marijuana when I was 17. I had a buddy named Jim who was growing it in his basement. And I remember rolling it up and kind of giggling a little bit. And I personally didn't like the way it made me feel. So I didn't use it again after high school. So when I first heard about these, dabs and vapes and these edibles and things like that, I didn't know what any of that meant. I first heard the dabs and I thought that they were talking about that dance move Cam Newton was doing, just so you know how clueless I was about all of this when my son started. You see, when I was smoking weed back in Jim's basement, the potency of the THC, and you all know what that is, right? Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Delta 9 is marijuana, Delta 8 is hemp. Was so weak. It was like 1 or 2%. And I didn't know that the potency had started to climb. All right. I got this chart from a buddy of mine who, with the Drug Enforcement Administration, was showing in the red line how THC has climbed in the years. By the time Johnny was using it in 2000, when he was born, it was 5%. In 2010, it reached 10%. 2021, it reached 15%. Today, 2025, average flower in a dispensary in the 25 legal states is 20% THC in a gram of dried flower. And that is just average. Some strains can be up to 40%. But then some really smart people thought to themselves, what if we could just take out the part of the marijuana that makes people high? So in the plant, if you magnify the marijuana thousands of times, you see what look like little sticky glands. Those are called trichomes. And if you magnify 1,000th of times, you see what looks like a golf ball and a golf tee. Inside that golf ball, right in there, is the THC. So some really smart people, when I first started dabbing in 2015, they thought to themselves, let's just make a machine. And they did. That can just kind of suck out the THC out of the plant. So basically, they run a solvent through the plant. It's usually butane, propane, ethanol. And that breaks off those little trichomes and makes the THC leave the plant. So they take that solution, they try to back out the solvent, they distill it, they make it more pure, they spin it, they heat it, they dry it. Out of this machine come products now that average 60%, but they can be up to 100% pure. These are all nicknamed dabs in the industry. Again, I had no idea what they were even talking about. These are all chemicals, and I'm going to show you some of them. If you have not been into a dispensary lately, I highly recommend you go on a field trip so that you can understand what's out there and what our children are using. All of these products are made in a lab. When I do assemblies, the teens always like, oh, Mrs. Stack, you know, God made it. It grows in the ground. It's like, dude, none of these, you can't pick any of these things. This is not, you know, the ditchweed that grew here 100 years ago. I don't show any of these photos to our teens, by the way. This is not my talk that I give in schools, just so everybody knows. But this is crystal. This is butane hash oil. Here's shatter. This is sugar, ambrosia, resin. This is batter, and this is a diesel wax. These are all called dabs, concentrates. They are concentrated THC products. Again, average 60%, but crystal, for example, top left, is nearly pure, 99% THC. The reason they call them dabs is because you need so little that when you use it, and they're heated, all right, you take your little dab, you get something red hot, a blowtorch or a pen that has a heating element inside of it, and you just take a teeny little bit and you tap it to that heated surface, or use your pen, your inhale to activate it, and into your lungs, into your blood, into your brain, and you are high. It's so potent. In a minute, you can feel the effects of this. So one dab, if you take a dab, it's the same number of milligrams as 50 joints smoked when I was a girl, when it was 2% THC. If I smoked a joint by myself, it would be like 5 milligrams back in the 80s. Today, a dab can be 250, 300 milligrams. If you buy a cartridge of vape, right? It's a gram, 80% THC, that's 800 milligrams in a cart compared to 5 milligrams in a joint. So the things that the kids are using, these vapes, the Delta 8 products where marijuana is illegal, it doesn't matter. They just make it from hemp. Loophole in the Farm Act. Now you have Delta 8 THC in vapes, in gummies. This is a gummies from Colorado. And you can see in the package, it says there's 1,000 milligrams of THC in this box. One serving is 10 milligrams, a serving. And there's 1,000 milligrams. So every gummy in here, if you see, it says 20 gummies, 50 milligrams each. One gummy is 5 servings. So they think that you're just going to eat the ear off of it. The kids, of course, have no idea you're supposed to just eat the ear. So they just pop the whole thing in their mouth. And then what happens? Nothing, because you ate it. And now it has to go through digestion, and it can take 30 to 60 minutes before you ever feel anything. And this is how a lot of teens are overdosing, and you can overdose absolutely on THC. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to make you vomit, hallucinate, have a hard time breathing, go into comas. I have seen many THC overdoses. It's quite scary. And as a result of this is the last data we have from SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, 2022. In 2022, nearly 3 million teens ages 12 through 17 used THC products, and almost half of them, 45%, became addicted. In other words, it wasn't just a casual thing. They developed what's called cannabis use disorder, i.e. dependence, where now they have to use it every day, all day, because if they don't, they feel really bad. So how does that happen to them? How are our teens victims? How do their brains get hijacked? It has to do with the way the brain forms. And teens really don't understand this because nobody tells them. How does THC make you high? How does THC impact your brain formation? What are the outcomes when you're a teen? What does it do to you? And this is what we seek to share with teens when we do assemblies. So the brain forms from the back of the skull forward, the bottom of the skull up. The last place to form right in front, the prefrontal cortex, the adult brain. This chart shows the age of 20, but we actually know young women's brains form until about the age of 25, young men's brains until the age of 28 to 30. I know we don't probably need a lot of commentary on that. So in the early 90s, they finally discovered why THC makes you high. Turns out there is a receptor in the brain that the THC molecule binds to and gives you this high feeling. So they named this receptor the CB1, cannabinoid 1 receptor. Oh, well, lo and behold, the THC molecule has the identical molecular structure on the bottom as our own natural chemical that is supposed to bind to that receptor called anandamide. And most people have never heard of anandamide. You've heard of dopamine, serotonin. There's lots of neurotransmitters, but anandamide is your body's natural high. It controls your moods, your energy, your emotions. And because they're the same on the bottom, the brain thinks THC is anandamide and it lets it bind in that receptor. Well, unfortunately, we have receptors for anandamide throughout our bodies. Not only is there a CB1, cannabinoid 1 receptor that controls your entire nervous system. You see there in orange. There's a CB2, cannabinoid 2, that controls your entire immune system. All of those organs have a receptor where THC can bind. But check out that brain, the forming brain of the teen. We really didn't understand until very recently what happens when THC gets in there. And I'm not going to read this to you, but anywhere you see a pink dot here is a receptor where THC can bind. So we know, for example, in the growing brain in the hippocampus, where learning and memory takes place. We know when teens use, by the time they're young adults, they will have lost between 6 to 8 IQ points, right? If they're an A student, that is a C. So it impacts cognition. We know it slows reaction time in the cerebellum, in the basal ganglia. We know it impacts their ability to do sports. We know in the orbital frontal cortex that it impacts motivation, but particularly in that prefrontal cortex. This is one study. They took 799 14-year-olds and they did scans on their brains. Then they took them again when they were 19 and did scans on their brains. And depending upon how many times that teen had used THC in that 5-year period, with 0 being the baseline, they showed a thinning in the prefrontal cortex. Turns out the brain does a little creative pruning of the neurons. These are neurons. You can see, these are rats, by the way. You can't do this with human. It's illegal. But you can do it with rats because they have the same dendritic structure. Dendrites, those things that communicate from nerve cell to nerve cell. So a normal healthy rat is on the left side. The top is, you can see all the dendrites, really pretty, very bushy. 2 weeks later, you can see how they're growing. But on the right side, when you give a rat a THC pellet, it turns green. This is the neuron. Basically, the dendrites are frozen. They're kind of paralyzed. In neurology, they call this hypofrontality. It means that it stopped forming. And if you give it THC for 2 weeks, lower right corner, you see that the dendrites are snipped off. They have literally been pruned. So it's very much like pruning a tree. You know, if you prune that limb off, that particular limb is no longer going to grow. Now it can grow in other places. So luckily the brain has great neuroplasticity and it can improve and it can grow, but you can't put back what is pruned off. And we know in even 1 or 2 uses that the brain changes. And I didn't know any of this. I mean, if Johnny were alive today, he'd be 25 years old. And we have a huge cohort of young people in Colorado whom we did these studies on, guinea pigs who started using when Johnny used when it was legal. And here we are 13 years later, and they're in their 20s. And we've seen what happens when young people whose brains are still forming use. And I don't know why people don't listen to Colorado, don't look at the legislation we've put in place, don't look at the guardrails we've had to erect to keep this from happening. We've gone from 6,000 medical marijuana cards to under 1,000 from 2015 to 2025 in 10 years, because we've seen the harms that this can bring to our youth, particularly in the way of mental illnesses and psychosis, and sadly, in suicide. Johnny, I mean, never thought that, you know, that anything would happen to him. He would say, Mom, you know, I've got straight A's. I'm obviously, this isn't hurting me. And it didn't look like it was. Like, it was so weird because people would point to my son and they'd be like, well, look at that Johnny Stack. Like, you know, he hits that vape all day long every day. And he's going to be the valedictorian. Like, it isn't hurting him. And it didn't look like it was hurting him until it did. And it was like that. And I remember right before his senior year, he'd been using for like 3 years. It was like, my husband and I talk about, like an alien came down and switched us sons. And this one in the middle, that smile is really deceiving because he was really mean. And he would swear at me. He was defiant. He would vape right in front of us. He'd hit his pen. He stopped wanting to go to school. He wouldn't do chores. He started dropping out of everything. He pushed me. I mean, we were afraid of him. We put locks on our doors because we were like, maybe he's, you know, gonna stab us in the middle of the night. And when he turned 18, he moved out. You can see him on the right there. He left. It was February of his senior year. And unbeknownst to us, he went and got himself a medical marijuana card. And there was nothing wrong with him. You know, he was healthy as a horse. It's just a sham. It's just a big joke. We've since put regulations around it in Colorado. But back then you could be like, oh, I've got a hangnail. I need a med card. So he graduated with 4 Ds his senior year. And this was a perfect SAT and math kid, 800 out of 800, a 4.0, scholarship, everything. He graduates with 4 Ds. He's still got a 3.2. He walks with honor scores. He goes off to Colorado State University where he has his scholarship, and he's there for 2 weeks, and he texts me that he feels like killing himself every day. And he said, I've been dabbing nonstop with my roommate. I am still trying to understand what this means that he's dabbing. I really still was so clueless about wax and shatter and all these concentrates that he was using. He has to go to a mental hospital. He loses his scholarship and he recovers. And then he comes home and it was like the alien brought my kid back. It was so weird. Once he became sober from having to stay in the mental hospital and the THC left his body, he was scared. He was like, whoa, I am never going to use, like he had great insight. He had a lot of awareness, finally, that THC was harming him. So he goes back to school against our wishes and goes to UNC, and he is just there for a very short period of time. And he calls me at 3 a.m. and he's like, Mom, someone bugged my dorm room. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Who bugged your dorm room? He's like, the FBI. This is an FBI base. And I realized that my son has just completely lost touch with reality. He starts buying these burner phones. And this is a snap that I found on his phone after he passed. So you can kind of see how this paranoia had set in. He was so suspicious. And when I cleaned out his dorm room, that's when I started to finally understand what I was dealing with. This is what I found in his drawer, this nectar collector. And I asked his roommate about it. I'm like, what is this? He's like, dabs. What? So I just want you to understand that so many people like me are completely uneducated, unaware. We don't know what we don't know. And we just go, oh, it's just weed, whatever, I used it. This is what just weed did to my son's brain. This is a journal that we found after he died. And one of the entries, he said, I was set up by the mob. Another day he wrote, UNC is secretly a military base. He says here, the whole world knows about me. And his diagnosis, this is the doctor's writing at the mental hospital, was THC abuse severe. The doctor was like, it's just weed. We didn't find anything else. And we did genetic testing. He doesn't have any of the, gene clusters, COMT, TQ1, all these gene clusters. And the thing that makes me maddest, I think about all this, is that the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment knows that THC causes psychosis. This is the top half of a flyer that they are required to put into your bag in a dispensary if you purchase THC. They warn people about having psychotic symptoms, psychotic disorder, mental health symptoms, vomiting, addiction. And we know now Denmark showed us just 2 years ago in a landmark study, 7 million people, 5 decades of data, that 30% of their young men who had cannabis, schizophrenia, cannabis-induced psychosis, mimics that kind of schizophrenia lens, wouldn't have had it. 30% of young men ages 21 to 30 wouldn't have had it had they not used THC and developed cannabis use disorder when they were young. They had it. 2% incidence of schizophrenia in their population before the introduction of marijuana, and now they have an 8%. In Canada, same thing. They went from 4% incidence of schizophrenia in their population before legalization, 10% afterward. Genetically, 0.6%. If, no THC was used. We know then if you narrow it down, if you're 14 to 18 years old, young men, and you go to the emergency room with cannabis-induced psychosis in Ontario, out of 12 million people, 41.3% of them will develop schizophrenia in 3 years. So that's like huge, like less than 60% of young men who get this are going to be okay. The rest of them are going to convert 40% to schizophrenia. This is a new statement that came out of the American Psychiatric Association. There is no current scientific evidence that cannabis is in any way beneficial for the treatment of any psychiatric disorder. And in contrast, current evidence supports at minimum a strong association of cannabis use with the onset of psychiatric disorders. In other words, it's causing it. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable to harm given the effects of cannabis on neurological development, end quote. And sadly, in Colorado, Johnny is now a statistic because the number one cause of death in our youth in Colorado now is suicide, ages 15 through 18. And the number one substance they find in their toxicology report, THC, 35%. So Johnny had to go to mental hospital again. He again lost his scholarship, and they had to put him on a little bit of an antipsychotic to get him to stop thinking the mob was after him. And he got better again. He could have been okay. A second time, a second chance at life. The aliens brought him back, and we bought him a dog. He got a job, went to a Billy Joel concert in Denver. He came to town just a month before Johnny died. And you can see him there. He's sober. He's happy, smiling, got his little concert t-shirt. And he said, Mom, I'm never going to, of course, use THC again, but I'm never going to use alcohol again. I'm never going to smoke cigarettes again. I'm never going to do any drug again. And unbeknownst to us, he stopped using his antipsychotic. And you can't just stop it. They want to slowly titrate you off of it. The protocol is you're on it for 6 to 9 months, and then they'll start backing off to see kind of what they're dealing with. But if you just stop it, it can actually cause the very thing that it's supposed to help with. And in this case, we think some of those thoughts about the mob being after him maybe were coming back. We'll never know. But he came to us 3 days before he died in our kitchen, 19 years old. He said, Mom, I just want you to know you were right. And I said, about what? He said, about the marijuana. He said, you probably don't remember, but you told me many years ago that marijuana would hurt my brain, and it has ruined my mind and my life. And I'm really sorry, Mama. I love you. And that is the warning that we repeat through hundreds of thousands of teens in school assemblies all over the country now. He sent out a Snapchat. He had blocked me on his Snapchat, so I didn't get it, but our son James got it. And it was a picture of his car odometer. It read 133661. And the most we can understand is that maybe he was such a genius in math that he added those three together, those 2 3s. Maybe he saw this as 16661. Maybe he thought the number was magic. We will never know. But he wrote out Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For one extreme to exist, there must be the opposing. We'll never know. But now we know, as of 2023, 35% of those teens like Johnny, and he was 19, so he's only been a little older, who died by suicide have THC in their system. And in Canada, those 12 million people I told you about, 9.7% more likely to have died by suicide 5 years after receiving care in a hospital for cannabis addiction. And if you don't have legal marijuana in your state, you have a much lower suicide rate. This is according to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. This research is barely a year old. 12 to 25-year-olds out of 100,000, 9.76 if you don't have marijuana, 12.78 if you have medical, and then 16 points. So as marijuana friendliness goes up, so do the suicide rates. After Johnny died, he died in 2019, right before the holidays. So obviously the holidays were horrible. I don't remember much of them, but in early 2020, you remember what happened. It was COVID and we were locked down, and I basically was in a fetal position for 6 months. And my world had stopped. I was locked down. I was alone. And 6 months later, after all my research, my writing, my grief, and reading and talking with doctors and addiction psychiatrists and experts, I thought somebody has to tell everyone. Because if I don't, who will? And I started our nonprofit, Johnny's Ambassadors, just 6 months after Johnny died in May of 2020. So it's now been 5 years, unbelievably. And I wrote during COVID Johnny's life story. It's 300 pages. You can get it on Amazon. All proceeds go to our nonprofit. The dangerous truth about today's marijuana. And that's why we called this session that title, because it's so dangerous. It's like a rattlesnake, it's poisonous. And if you play with it, it's going to bite you. And now, my husband and I, we're in Florida now. We basically go around the country and we do school assemblies mostly. So I'm happy to be able to do this with you here tonight. And we create materials. I'll put a QR code up at the end. You can scan, and I'll be happy to send you materials. I mean, we have so many educational materials. It's a little overwhelming. Magazines and PowerPoints and videos and game shows. I mean, so much. And that's my email. We have a support group of over 2,000 parents now, I mentioned, whose children are in cannabis-induced psychosis. We have over 15,000 Johnny's Ambassadors 5 years later of people who have been impacted by THC use. And they're after our kids, and they are not going to stop. The average user in Colorado, the number one buyer of THC products in dispensaries today is 18 to 24. And they just need to get the kids addicted when they're 14, 15, 16 and put them into the funnel, because this is a multi-billion-dollar organization. And teaching kids, not preaching, not being like, don't do drugs, drugs are bad, but we actually teach them the science. We teach them about CB1 receptors. We teach them about anandamide. We teach them about the endocannabinoid system. We teach them why THC is bad for them, because nobody is telling them the truth. And they just have a bunch of misinformation out there, and they listen to the science. They really do pay attention for an entire hour while I talk to them in a school assembly. I know you don't think that is possible, but you can hear a pin drop when I'm sharing Johnny's story. Whoops, sorry, forgot to turn off the. So I would love for you all, Paul, for your group, any of your parents, to be Johnny's Ambassadors. If you want to scan this, I will send you our educational resources, some links. I'll put you on our newsletter so that you can stay in touch with us, send you the links on how to join our support group if you need support, because that's so critically important, to be able to talk with people who have been where you are, who are going through what you're going through, and can understand how you're feeling, because we need support, we need help, we need resources, we need answers to our questions, because so many people just really don't understand any of what we're going through. So I'm going to take this down, Paul, and stop sharing here. And yeah, so Paul asked me to leave 15 or 20 minutes or so at the end.
Thank
And I'm
you.
happy to answer questions.
Thanks. And I think a lot of times on these calls, if somebody unmutes, then we know they're ready. But let me just ask the first question, and that is, um, you know, in your website, I just looked under treatment centers and I looked under resources for someone who's struggling, and marijuana anonymous was mentioned.
Yeah,
So all the power to you to have those resources listed. And
thank you. Yeah, let me put some I'll put some links in here. We have, I mean, there's just so much that, so we don't, as Johnny's ambassadors, provide all of this ourselves. We just can't because we're very small. But we have a ton of allied partners. So we have, like I said, Marijuana Anonymous, Bart Bright provides that resource for us. We have a group called Together, which is young adults who are recovering from cannabis-induced psychosis. We have a group, the Parent Action Network, who works with us in policy and legislative action. Since we don't do that work, we work in prevention. So this is such a huge effort, and everyone kind of has a different lane, so to speak. And so we don't really work in treatment, but we do have, 2,000 parents who are in this group. I'll put the link up. Who have cannabis-induced psychosis, whose children are in cannabis use disorder. You don't have to have psychosis to join. But they kind of help each other, because I
yeah.
can't help all those people.
Lisa, did you have a question?
Well, yeah. Hi, Laura. I'm actually one of the 2,000 people in your Facebook group.
Yay!
And
Hi!
we've exchanged some messages recently.
I'm so glad. Hi, Lisa. It's so good to see you.
Yeah. I have two questions. Well, one is I'm trying to, I had told the group of the ambassadors, I'm trying to work a connection with 60 Minutes to
Oh, yes.
try to get them to interview Laura. But my question is, my son, who has been in psychosis for years from smoking pot, several of his friends who he did dabbing with did not become psychotic. And so, do you know if there needs to be a genetic predisposition in order for, like, why do some of them become psychotic and some don't?
Yeah, that's a great question because, Johnny didn't have any problems for many years. So it was like, oh, he seems like he's fine. And some people use it for years and they don't. The short answer is no, you do not have to have a genetic predisposition. We know that because of research done primarily in the UK, that shows the genetic scores of schizophrenia, 0.6% of the population, different from, 10%, those who have used cannabis and become schizophrenic. So we know, and they present differently. The pathway is a bit different. So it has to do with, I mean, obviously there's some kind of genetic component, but it doesn't mean you have to have the genes for that. It means it could activate it. I mean, there has to be some sort of environmental trigger, right? That makes this, it's kind of like people who have a predisposition for heart attacks in their families, right? I mean, you might be the healthiest person out there and still have a heart attack because you have genetics, or you could have no genetics.
Right.
But if you eat really poorly and never exercise, you can still give yourself a heart attack, right? Yeah. So don't have to have it, because you can cause that simply by your behaviors. But we do know if you do have genetics, I don't know if not to ask you, but if you did have a first family, relative who had bipolar, then it's even more important, right? But Johnny had no genetic predisposition. We don't have psychosis in our family. He didn't have any mental illness. he didn't have depression. He wasn't anxious. He didn't have, he didn't have trauma. He was just a normal kid. And we even did the Genemind. They were like, well, maybe you've got COMT gene, ATK1 gene. There's all these clusters. Johnny didn't have any of those. And that's new research that has come out of the UK showing that it doesn't have to be genetic. We have those CB1 receptors all over our brains, and it's non-discriminatory where it binds. It tends to be age of onset of use, frequency of use, and potency of the product, right? So some of these kids who are using it, maybe they're just using it once a month, and Johnny was hitting that vape all day, every day, before class, after class, before lunch, after lunch. And so it was affecting him a lot more from his behaviors and habits.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
Laura, I had a question about what you think when you hear from people that, well, the marijuana being sold in the cannabis dispensaries is safe because the state is regulating it, it's inspecting it, it's got to be safe, right? And you were talking about these different percentages of THC, and clearly 20% THC is not safe. But
Yeah.
could you just
That's
talk?
a joke.
Could
That's
you
a
talk
joke.
about the dispensaries that are selling product and,
There's a big
safe?
study out of California that showed all of their dispensary weed was contaminated. It had pesticides, it had molds, it had pollutants, that's a joke. And there's no regulation around potency. There's no caps. They could sell 99% THC. I guess what most people don't understand is, like, back in the day, when I was using it, when I was 17, this was the 80s, it was like 2% THC. This was ditchweed. This was stuff that, like, grew in the ground, right? You could pick it. It's been around for hundreds of years. Then they started messing with it. And so now it's called a GMO, genetically modified organism. They started crossing the various strains. So today's weed averages 20%, but it can be 40%. And the vapes and the dabs are 80, 90. This stuff didn't exist there. And this is what people don't understand. There's no FDA approved dispensary products. There are zero. There are no studies that show any of these high potency products are beneficial. They're talking about old weed, right? Jim's basement weed doesn't exist anymore. It has been completely bred out of existence. You can't buy THC content under 10%. And that is the definition of high potency, anything over 10%. FDA approved cannabis derived medications like Marinol, Durabinol, Epidiolex doesn't even have any THC in it. It's CBD. It's raw pharmaceutical grade CBD. And you can't buy that in a dispensary. That has to be prescribed by a physician and filled in a pharmacy, right? So these dispensary products are not anything about what's been medically approved, like Durabinol for nausea for chemotherapy patients who have undergone cancer treatment. It's like 2.5 milligrams of synthetic THC in sesame oil, right? A joint today is 100 milligrams. Like, that has never been FDA approved. There is no, medical use of anything purchased in a dispensary. So that is a joke. That is a sham. That is the industry's way of using the word medical to kind of get the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak. There is no medical benefit. They'll say, oh, it's good for glaucoma, it's good for this and that, and nothing has been proven. The only thing that's even been slightly proven but been refuted is pain. and that's because you're high, and anybody has pain. So that's kind of a joke, but it's specific to neuropathy, which is your nervous system. Like if you have diabetes in your feet, you can get a prescription from your doctor for Marinol. And that's just a tiny, tiny bit. All of these dispensary products are not medical, not approved, not FDA approved. None of them are safe. And it doesn't matter that they're in a dispensary. They're all toxic. They're all high potency, and it's extremely potent and poisonous at any level for the teen brain.
Okay, thank you. And we have two people that have questions. Melanie, do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't want to go on and on. I'll try to make it quick, but back in 2018, my daughter married a gentleman from the UK, and soon after they got married, she developed like anxiety and throwing up from morning till night. So she lost a lot of weight, and supposedly she has an eating disorder. So her husband called me and said, I don't know what to do. She's up every morning throwing up. She's throwing up all day long. I said, well, it sounds like she needs to see a doctor or maybe a therapist. Oh, well, we don't do that. We have each other. So anyway, he told her that if she smokes pot, that it will make her hungry. She'll get the munchies and then she'll get over her eating disorder. So he had her starting marijuana, and of course, she's addicted to it now. She since has through COVID, they got on each other's nerves so much that he went back home and they got a divorce.
Ugh.
And now, so she came home for like a week or two and decided to just took off and moved to Miami. And she does the vaping now. I don't know what's in the vape. I don't know if it's just cigarettes, like nicotine, or if it's both. But when she was home for 2 weeks, she smoked from 7 a.m. till bedtime, and her personality has changed. And she had a good job before she got divorced and moved to Miami, but now she works part time, and we pretty much support her, which is against my wanting to do. But my husband
Yeah.
my husband wants to help her, but it's actually really hurting her because she's becoming very lazy and not working. And so what do you think? I'm thinking of
How old is she?
she's 31.
And what time, and when did she start using?
How old was she? She was like 25.
Yeah. So my reaction is her eating disorder was not an eating disorder. That is called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It's very common. CHS, there's a CB2 receptor in your digestion. It makes people puke. There are 400,000 people right now on a Reddit stream called R Leaves who are desperately trying to quit THC because it makes you vomit. It is a chronic vomiting disorder. We just lost a 16-year-old girl in Pueblo, Colorado to CHS. She showed up at the emergency room. She was puking, puking, puking. They go, oh, she needs a CAT scan, $5,000 with scan. She's got, bulimia. She's got this, eating disorder, la, la, la. And it wasn't, it was the THC. She didn't stop using. She got dehydrated, her organs shut down, and she died from renal failure. It is, the vomiting is very serious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think she vomits anymore, as far as I know.
right. But what I'm saying is that it could have been not an eating disorder, but it
Right.
could have all been wrapped up in the THC from the beginning. And now
Yeah.
it sounds like it's changed her brain. Your brain grows until your 30s, 28 to 30 years old. It can hit the orbital frontal cortex, causes a motivational syndrome, what you're describing as laziness, as withdrawing from
Yeah.
life. Everything that you're describing is all wrapped up in the THC, and she's an adult. And so, at some point you have to set boundaries and very tough love
Yeah.
and say, we love you, but we will only support you in a life of recovery. And we are not going to support your THC use, and you need treatment. And
Yeah.
um,
I found a woman in
Thank you.
Miami, not far from her, where she lives, that's a addiction specialist therapist, and she also does the where they go and they try to get you put into a place.
Interventions,
Yeah,
yeah.
interventions.
Great,
Yeah. I was
great.
thinking about saying to her, you know what, this money train is going to stop unless if you talk to this woman.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, she's 30 years old and she's gonna have to figure out how to support herself. And if she's going to use, that is very expensive. And you give her a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it sounds like everything is related to the THC use.
Yeah, I said to her,
thanks,
you know,
Melanie.
what's that?
We're gonna have to move on to
Sure.
Kia. Kia, could you ask a question?
Yes, thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your story. I am also one of your over 2,000 parents in the parent group, so thank you so much.
Yay.
So just two really quick questions. You mentioned that Johnny at one point had started taking antipsychotic medication. Was he taking that medication simultaneously while also dabbing or, or engaging in
No,
THC? I'm
no.
in that scenario.
No,
My son.
never, never.
Yeah,
You can never be using THC. You cannot separate what is happening with the THC to the brain and what the antipsychotic is doing to try to help that. There can be no baseline. There can be no THC use. They have to be 100% sober from THC, or you simply cannot. It renders all your antipsychotics ineffective.
yeah. So that's the current situation I'm in. My son was sober, and then he's been taking his antipsychotic medication, but then relapsed, but is still willing to take his antipsychotic medication to manage the behaviors. So
Yeah, until
more,
he's done with that THC, I would drug test him every week.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that has to be part of it. He has to go into residential treatment.
yeah,
It's very hard to detox. I mean, and we're not talking just a couple weeks. I mean, as you know, a lot of our parents in our group have had their kids in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, of treatment in order to change their habits, their thinking, their lives, because then they just come back to the same situation and just go right back to using. They really have to change their surroundings, their environment, everything. And if they come home, a lot of them just start right back up again. So yeah,
yeah.
that's really tricky.
And
Can I
then
say something there?
sorry, the second question was information about the group you talked about for young people. How do we get,
Yeah,
young people
that's
involved?
I'll put it in the chat. They do that every Wednesday night. johnny'sambassadors.org/together.
Thank you.
They do have to agree to be sober. So the group won't accept him if he's using.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, they all are trying to, that's what it's all about. They're recovering from cannabis-induced psychosis, and they have a pact. That's what they're doing, is trying to help each other, because you have to have different friends, different life. You can't be around your old friends because all your old friends are using, so they're really trying to support each other in a life of recovery and form new friendships.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Maureen, did you have a question?
Sure. Hi, Laura. I just want thank you so much for all of your education. I use it all the time when I'm speaking with children,
Okay.
and for families as well. Since you're, you have seen a lot over the last 5 years in terms of education in different states, obviously are in different stages of education. And here in Connecticut, we're really on the cusp of getting parents educated on this quickly. Just wondering, what have you seen that has been very effective from a public health perspective and more in mass? So we're trying to get information out to parents, but maybe there's something that you've seen in other states that has been effective or you thought was a good idea.
Colorado, it's public, information campaigns. We have on our website PSAs that you can use, that we've created and have gone through considerable expense, 15-second, 30-second, 60-second PSAs, get them on TV, get them on radio. In Colorado, there's a campaign, the T on THC. We have one called Just Say No, KNOW.org. We use radio, we use billboards, we use TV, we use social media. Right now we've got a cannabis-induced psychosis campaign that goes on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on X, on Facebook, you know, so that's what it is. It's just blasting the airwaves, in the media, anywhere and everywhere. We do, you know, schools. We have videos that you can show as, you know, watch parties. We do parent events. You can show recordings of webinars. I'll put that link up there. But you know, we find that trying to do night events don't work because they just conflict with homework and sports and dinner and childcare and everything. So we do a lot of parent coffees, lunch and learns seem to work. Sending out recordings of videos. I mean, yes, yes, and yes, you know, anything everywhere that you can do is helpful. You gotta just do everything you can do to reach people.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Laura, in your new career, you've written 2 books now because you have another book, which is 25 stories from
Yes.
parents. And that's
Well,
amazing.
so I wrote 8 books before this ever happened. So the book about Johnny was my 9th book. I'll put a link there. The book about our parents, the impact of THC on our children, I'll put that link up there. That was 25 additional parent stories. We are now writing our 3rd book that comes out this fall. And that one is on, it's called CIP and Me. And that one is being written by the teens who have had CIP and have come out the other side. That one, if you know anybody who might want to write for that book, I'll put that link up here. Book guidelines. Someone is welcome to post or to be an author for that as well.
Well, I mean, I know you have an Instagram account, and I saw where you're now having some of the parents that took part in your 2nd book,
Yes,
are speaking up, and
they're doing videos.
that just touches me because it is so brave of them
Yeah,
to do that, to publicly share.
put yourself out there, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, we're going to do almost 100 of those. We have a documentary, a 1-hour documentary that's going to be coming out in June. So we have parents that are recording videos with them. I'll put that up here so people can go and see what we're doing on Facebook. But then we share it on X and LinkedIn, on Instagram. And so we're just trying hard. Those parents are so brave. It's hard, you know, it's hard to talk about what happened to your child, but it's just as much your story as it is your child's story. You know, I know that every time I talk, like in this forum, you know, somebody hears me and somebody will be saved as a result of what I'm doing. And so for me, it's very healing to tell my story, but I tell it a lot, so it's really hard. These parents are very brave.
Yeah. Oh, I think at least one life is saved for every story that's told like that. And every time
yeah.
for you, I don't know how many lives you saved, but I think we'll end it there. Laura, thank you very much for joining us this evening. This was outstanding.
Thank you. And
And
anybody's welcome to email me. I'll put my email addresses up there. I have a Laura@theproductivitypro.com. That's my nonprofit email address. You're not bothering me. If you have any questions, shoot me an email.
And I can vouch that I can vouch that she does respond to emails.
I do.
I sent
do.
it to her.
Very quickly.
Yeah. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you,
I
Paul.
really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Let me know how I can support you.